History usually doesn't scream when it changes direction. It whispers. But sometimes, in the rare, freezing air of the Swiss Alps, the tectonic plates of global power shift so violently that you can hear the cracking of the foundation. For 70 years, the world ran on a simple, unspoken agreement. The United States leads, and everyone else follows in exchange for protection and prosperity. That deal is dead. It didn't die on a battlefield. It died on a stage in Davos, Switzerland, in front of the masters of the universe, who suddenly realized their money could no longer buy stability. The silence in the auditorium wasn't respect. It was the sound of the American century suffocating. A man walked onto that stage, a representative of America's closest neighbor, its oldest friend, its most reliable junior partner, and he didn't come to shake hands. He came to hold a funeral for the rules-based order. He came to tell the world that the superpower they feared was no longer a guardian, but a predator. And when he was done, he didn't stick around to hear the response. He walked out. What you are about to hear is the anatomy of a diplomatic assassination. This is the moment the West broke in two. Breaking. Mark Carney just delivered the most powerful rebuke to American dominance the world has witnessed in decades. And what happened next has sent shockwaves through every corridor of power, from the Situation Room in Washington to the Politburo in Beijing. The Canadian Prime Minister walked onto the stage at the World Economic Forum in Davos on Tuesday with a message that no world leader has dared to say out loud in years. The old order is gone. The rules-based international system that kept the peace since World War II has collapsed, and the world's most powerful nation, the United States, is now using economic coercion as a weapon against its own allies. Carney never mentioned Donald Trump's name, not once. He didn't have to. Every single person in that auditorium, the billionaires, the defense contractors, the media moguls, knew exactly who he was talking about. Carney stood at the podium, his voice devoid of the usual Canadian politeness, and declared, "Great powers are using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs are no longer just trade policy. They are leverage. Financial infrastructure is no longer a utility. It is a tool of coercion. Supply chains are no longer bridges. They are vulnerabilities to be exploited." The room fell into a stunned silence. This wasn't the diplomatic language of the G7. This wasn't a frank exchange of views. This was a direct, lethal challenge to the American president, a man who had spent the last few weeks threatening to annex Canada, buy Greenland, and reshape the world map according to his personal whims. Carney's voice remained steady, surgical, as he delivered line after devastating line. "You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration," he said. "When integration becomes the source of your subordination, let that sink in." For decades, the selling point of globalization was that binding our economies together prevented war. Carney just argued the opposite. That binding yourself to a superpower today is an act of submission. He warned that the multilateral institutions that middle powers like Canada have relied on for generations, the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, the architecture of collective problem solving, are under existential threat. And the threat isn't coming from rogue states. It is coming from great powers who have abandoned even the pretense of following the rules. And then came the warning that resonated across every continent, a rallying cry for the nations caught in the middle. Carney looked out at the crowd and said, "Middle powers must act together, because if we are not at the table, we are on the menu." The audience erupted. A standing ovation in Davos is rare. A standing ovation for a speech attacking the United States is unprecedented. Political leaders from Europe, corporate executives from Asia, and diplomats from the global south rose to their feet. They were applauding a speech that dared to say what they had all been thinking in private WhatsApp groups, but were too terrified to voice in public. Carney had done the unthinkable. He had told the truth about American hegemony. But what makes this moment truly extraordinary isn't just the speech. It is the choreography of disrespect that followed. Carney left the stage and didn't head to the VIP lounge. He didn't go to a bilateral meeting. He left Davos immediately. He departed for Zurich at approximately 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Do you know what else happened at 8 a.m. Eastern Time? Donald Trump's plane, Air Force One, was touching down in Switzerland. This was not a scheduling conflict. This was a message. There would be no meeting between the two leaders. No awkward handshake for the cameras. No forced smiles. No diplomatic niceties to smooth things over. Carney had delivered his indictment and walked away, leaving Trump to face an audience that was still buzzing from the Canadian Prime Minister's rebellion. When pressed by journalists about the snub, Canada's International Trade Minister, Maninder Sidhu, played it cool. "Parliament is resuming on Monday," he said. "We have work to do." But everyone understood the subtext. Canada was no longer waiting for American approval. Canada was no longer the little brother asking for a seat at the big kids' table. Canada was charting its own course. Carney flew home to Quebec City for a cabinet retreat, where he would double down on the vision he had laid out in Davos, building strategic autonomy, diversifying trade relationships, reducing dependence on the United States. 24 hours later, Donald Trump took that same stage in Davos, and he was clearly rattled. Trump thrives on dominance, on being the center of gravity. But Carney had stolen the gravity before Trump even entered the room. Trump opened his speech with an odd, defensive joke, acknowledging he was speaking to so many friends and a few enemies. It drew nervous, scattered laughter. Then he launched into the familiar greatest hits album, boasting about tax cuts, touting the unmatched lethality of American military power, demanding that Europe pay its bills for NATO protection. But when he got to Canada, the tone shifted. The teleprompter seemed to disappear, and the anger surfaced. "Canada gets a lot of freebies from us. By the way," Trump declared, leaning into the podium. "They should be grateful, but they're not." The president's voice grew sharper, more personal. "I watched your prime minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful." And then came the line that revealed just how deep the wound went, a line that sounded less like a statement of foreign policy and more like a threat from a landlord to a tenant. "Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements." The room shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't presidential rhetoric. This was a direct threat to the existence of a sovereign nation. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick had tried to do damage control earlier on Bloomberg TV. He dismissed Carney's speech with disdain. "Give me a break," Lutnick scoffed. "They have the second best deal in the world. And all I gotta do is listen to this guy whine and complain." They tried to paint Carney as a complainer, a whiner, but the world wasn't buying it. Carney hadn't been whining. He had been diagnosing a geopolitical cancer, and Trump's angry, menacing response only proved the Canadian Prime Minister's point. The relationship is no longer based on respect. It is based on the threat of annihilation. To understand why this moment matters so profoundly, you have to understand the pressure cooker of the last 6 months. You have to look at where Canada and the United States have been. For months, Trump has been publicly fantasizing, not joking, fantasizing about making Canada the 51st state. He has posted altered maps on social media, using Sharpies and digital edits to show Canada, Greenland, Venezuela, and Cuba as annexed territories of the United States. He refused to call Justin Trudeau Prime Minister. He called him Governor Trudeau. It was a calculated humiliation, designed to erase the concept of Canadian sovereignty in the minds of his voters. He threatened crushing tariffs on everything from lumber to cars. He demanded Canada spend billions on border security to stop a fentanyl crisis that, according to data, is largely flowing through U.S. ports, not the Canadian border. He insisted Canada increase military spending, not to defend Canada, but to buy specific American weapon systems to subsidize U.S. manufacturers. And for months, Canadian leaders tried the old playbook. They tried to play nice. Carney visited the White House just weeks after winning his election in April 2025. The meeting was cordial. They smiled. They shook hands. It was a stark contrast to the open hostility Trump showed Trudeau. Canada made concessions. Canada showed good faith. Canada hoped that if they just acted like adults, the tantrum would end. The strategy failed. Trump kept pushing. He kept threatening. He kept treating Canada like a colony that had forgotten its place. And in Davos, Mark Carney finally said, "Enough." But here is the critical part. Carney's speech wasn't just about Canada. If it were just about Canada, the world wouldn't have cared. It was about every middle power caught in the grinder of great power rivalry. We are living in an increasingly dangerous world where you are forced to choose a side. Belgium's Prime Minister, Bart de Wever, captured the mood perfectly when he responded to Trump's threats. So many red lines are being crossed. He said that you have the choice between your self-respect. Being a happy vassal is one thing, Being a miserable slave is something else. That is the choice Europe faces. That is the choice Asia faces. Be a happy vassal or a miserable slave. French President Emmanuel Macron echoed the sentiment, realizing that the American security umbrella was full of holes. Europe has very strong tools now, Macron said, and we have to use them when we are not respected. Carney's message resonated in Mexico, where leaders face the exact same bullying tactics from Washington on immigration and cartels. It resonated in Tokyo and Seoul, where nations are watching American reliability crumble in real time, wondering if they need their own nuclear weapons because the US won't be there. Carney's vision was clear, and it was a survival strategy. Middle powers cannot negotiate individually with hegemons from positions of weakness. If you go into a room alone with a giant, you get crushed. They must combine. They must build coalitions. They must create a third path between subordination to Washington and isolation from the world. Carney broke it down with brutal logic. When we only negotiate bilaterally with a hegemon, we negotiate from weakness. We accept what is offered. We compete with each other to be the most accommodating. He was describing the reality of the last 10 years. Countries fighting each other to be America's favorite pet. This is not sovereignty, Carney declared. It is the performance of sovereignty while accepting subordination. To drive this point home, Carney drew on one of the most powerful metaphors in 20th century political philosophy. He quoted the Czech dissident and later president Václav Havel. Havel wrote about living within a lie under communist rule. He described a greengrocer, a simple shopkeeper, who placed a sign in his window every morning among the onions and carrots. The sign read, "Workers of the world unite." The greengrocer didn't believe in that slogan. He didn't care about the workers of the world. Nobody did. But he put the sign up every single morning. Why? To avoid trouble, to signal compliance to the authorities, to show he was part of the team, to get along. The entire communist system persisted not just because of the secret police or the violence. It persisted because everyone from the greengrocer to the party official was willing to pretend it was legitimate. They were willing to perform the ritual. Carney argued that the rules-based international order has become exactly that kind of lie. We all pretend the rules apply to everyone. We all pretend that trade is free and fair. We all pretend that treaties matter. But deep down, everyone knows the truth. The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. And in Davos, Mark Carney decided he was done being the greengrocer. He took the sign out of the window. He smashed the illusion. And he told the world that Canada and the rest of the middle powers were done pretending. This speech wasn't just words, it was the sound of a geopolitical divorce. It was the moment the mask slipped and the world saw the raw, ugly face of power in the 21st century.